And there we go. And I'm going to, again, introduce myself, Allison Campbell with the Washington State Historical Society, here to talk today about sort of the realities of reopening our museum. And I want to kick this off actually by pulling up on the screen the governor's reopening guidelines for museums, and then go through just a couple of points and questions that have come up again and again from folks all across the museum sector to kind of, I think there's a few areas that are a little bit vague in these reopening guidelines, so I want to try and kind of hammer that out first. So in case you haven't navigated through our website recently, new website, woo, WashingtonHistory.org. So if you go to Heritage Resources here at the top, this is sort of everything that I kind of work on. There's the conference, all kinds of other things. And then if we go to COVID resources for museums, this is where all of the tools and information that we've put together for reopening small museums is kind of located. So these are a series of drop downs. This kind of explains what we were doing. It's got a link to 4 Cultures, excellent reopening toolkit. But it's here under the Washington State Reopening Guidelines where you'll find the link. And then all kinds of other, there's just lots of questions you can ask as you prepare to reopen, tips for like low-fi DIY, you know, sneeze guards and all kinds of things that I'm sure most of you have kind of already figured out. But I just want to quickly go to the guidelines here. Give me a thumbs up if that's big enough or needs to be bigger. Is that okay? Okay, John says it's all right. Jim says it's all right. Great. So just on this first page in these phase 2 reopenings, which is where most of our museums are, I just want to touch on a few things that I've had the opportunity to clarify with the team that kind of drafted these. So this first one, all patrons over the age of 2 must wear cloth face coverings in accordance with the order. In fact, the order says that face coverings are recommended for ages 2 through 4 and required for ages 5 and up, okay? So some museums may choose to require it for younger ages, for ages 2 to 4. Just anticipate that you might have to have some conversations with visitors about why you're doing that. You certainly can, but you need to be prepared to kind of explain, okay? And if anything that I'm saying runs contrary to anything that you all have heard, definitely let us know in the chat. My goal really for today is to try and clarify as much as we can, and any outstanding questions I will take back to that team that drafted these. And I know Joseph was there for a lot of these conversations, so he might be able to clarify for us too, and then get some hard answers for us, okay? So we may not have all the answers at the end of today. I wanted to go back here to number 2. Museums may operate exhibits and galleries. Total capacity is limited to 25%. So there are 2 ways to get to this number. You can take a space in your museum and take the fire marshal maximum capacity for that space and come up with 25% of that number, and that's how many people you're allowed to have in that gallery or that room. Or if for some reason you don't have that fire marshal number to work with, you can take the square footage and divide it by 113, which gets you 6 feet of social distance for that space. I would recommend you go with whatever number is smaller, okay, if you're gonna do both, and that's sort of the recommendation that I've heard. So hopefully that is a little bit more clear. We got a lot of questions in the beginning about how to come up with that capacity number. I think for those of you who remember kind of journeying with us through these guidelines as they've evolved over time, you know, initially there was a real attempt to make them as flexible as possible, knowing that museums come in all shapes and sizes. We have historic house museums, we have living history museums, we have traditional art galleries, all sorts of shapes and sizes. Some of that flexibility has been kind of stripped away, but here's an example. Utilize online or phone reservation systems with timed ticketing if possible, right? So a question recently came up about somebody still having to do cash transactions. That is not ideal. That is not what we would like to see, but if that's the only way you can make it happen, you know, there is a little bit of leeway there. I am sure that some of our presenters will be happy to talk about how they set up their kind of cashless online pre-order your tickets kind of situation. And I know that a lot of our museums are donation, and you have a donation bin and people can just drop their money in and that's it. And there's no kind of contact between frontline volunteers or staff and the money. So that's one thing. And then let's see. Okay. We'll talk, I'm sure, if there are any questions about this one-way traffic flow. This was really important to the governor's office that this be included. And we've, I think, talked a lot in other programs about kind of creative ways that you can establish that one-way traffic flow. Or if you can't, just limiting, you know, again, keeping the family groups small that are coming through a space, so you never kind of have more than one family group in a space. But we're happy to talk more about that and share some ideas. The last one I wanted to touch on, because this was confusing for lots of people, is no events allowed. So this question has been put back to the team, and my understanding is that as long as you are meeting this 25% capacity, I guess just don't get tripped up on this word event. So there's even been some email correspondence that if you wanted to do a rental, if you had a group wanting to rent your space, but if they were well within this, you know, below this 25%, right? As long as their numbers are within that, meaning that you know that they will have the amount of social distancing space that they need, then that is allowed. Then that should be just fine, okay? So this was kind of a sticky point. It seems so definitive right here, but then what do you consider an event? That's a little vague. So the real kind of thing to zero in on and pay careful attention to is that you are staying within this 25% limit for the space that you have. Joseph, is there anything you wanted to add to those those are the things that I've been hearing. Let me unmute you, hang on. Oh, wait. Oh.
Can I unmute myself? There we go.
Yes, please.
I don't really have anything to add, but I do remember that there was a lot of discussion about some of the terminology we would use because of just the diversity of the different types of museums that we have, large and small and little mom and pop museums, and the use of the words like, if possible, do this, or using the word may instead of shall do this or that procedure, so that it allows a little bit of flexibility. It has basically a strongly recommended procedure, but it's flexible for smaller museums.
Yeah, and you know, I think everybody here and in our museum community statewide is taking public health very, very seriously. None of us want to cut corners, you know, if we can avoid it. So this is the goal. This is what we hope you can achieve. But as Joseph said, you know, every space is different. Everybody's needs are different. So if you aren't sure if something won't work in your space and you want to try something different, feel free to email me. I will run it up the chain, and then at least you have some confidence that you are meeting the spirit of these guidelines. And you also will have some documentation to kind of back you up should anything be of concern. So I'm going to stop sharing. So now I can see everybody's faces, and I am going to invite Jim from Fort Nisqually Living History Museum to kind of share a little bit about what they've experienced. One thing Joseph mentioned before we started is that we have, of our 4 presenters here, we have different kind of jurisdictions. Joseph comes from a county museum, and Jim comes from Metro Parks. And so that's going to be a little bit different than what some of you who are just strict nonprofit 501c3 museums have to kind of navigate through. But I'm eager to hear from Jim. I'm going to unmute you and take it away.
Thanks, Allison. Yeah, so Jim Lauderdale from Fort Nisqually Living History Museum. Just to give everybody a little bit of background, you know, we shut down the same time probably most of you did, March 14th. We closed all Metro Parks facilities, and then we remained closed until middle July. So I had to lay off and furlough staff. I brought my first staff person back July 1st, and we were operating summer camps by mid-July. So in looking, you know, Allison just shared the guidance from the state for museums reopening, and I was re-examining that. I hadn't looked at it in a few weeks, and we definitely check all the boxes. So when we started thinking about reopening, first thing was making sure that we knew what that magic number was for our social distancing. And so we used the same formulas that Allison mentioned, figure out how many people we would have. Not only are we able to use the guidance that she showed, but we also use the phase 1 and 2 for outdoor recreation. Because being a living history museum, an open air museum, we have people outside. So we can have as many as 75 people inside the museum complex at one time, and then they're spread out from there. We already had a self-guided tour brochure, and so that was an easy one-way route for us. We had digitized the brochure right before we shut everything down. So when we came back, we developed a QR code so that when our guests came in, they could scan the QR code and use their phones to navigate in that one-way route through the museum. We've been using Eventbrite to sell our admissions. So we do have ticketed admission into the museum, and our guests can either go to our website and there's a link to Eventbrite, or when they arrive at the museum, if they have not pre-purchased tickets, which we encourage them to do, then they can scan the QR code with their smartphones and it will direct them to that link. So there's pre-purchase admissions. We don't do timed entry because we don't have enough people coming at one time. We've gotten semi-close. We've had 50 people at one time, but we've never had more than 50 people at one time, and our max capacity is 75 at one time. So we decided not to worry with timed entry. That was a little bit too much. But everybody seems to be getting it just fine, purchasing pre-admission. One of the things that I had anticipated when developing our reopening plan was that we would certainly see reduced capacity. And I anticipated a 35% reduction in our attendance. We've had a 75% reduction in attendance for where we would normally be at during the summer. So that was a huge hit to our projections. So we saw that in the first, in those first 2 weeks of July, and we quickly switched gears, cut some expenses, trim the fat as much as we could, and came out with a new plan for August. And, being with Metro Parks Tacoma, as Allison mentioned, there is a bottom line that we have to consider. And with the changes that we made, we were actually able to operate in a surplus instead of a subsidy, which was huge for a public entity like Metro Parks. So that worked out pretty well. I mentioned that we were doing day camps. So for the latter half of July and for the entire month of August, we operated day camps, which gave children in our community an outlet, a place to go and get outside. And we heard the stories from them so many times, and this would be our success story, that they needed to get out of the house. They had been cooped up since March, and both, mom and dad, grandparents, and the kids all needed some time away from each other. And so we were so happy to be able to provide that for our community. The camps were all full. We had a capacity of 15 per camp, and we sold out most of those camps. Moving into September, with school starting back, camps ended, and we started our virtual programming. And so we started a YouTube channel at the beginning of the pandemic, which we have not been able to keep up with. We've not had the staff capacity to keep up with the YouTube channel, but we've been offering virtual programming on the weekend. So on every Saturday, beginning the 1st of September, we started offering Fort from Home, which was virtual demonstrations. So if you were visiting Fort Nisqually, typically you would expect to see interpreters dressed in period clothes doing a demonstration of life from the 1850s. So we're bringing that to our audience virtually using Zoom currently as our platform. We offer a tiered scale for pricing, and that has been pretty successful. We're also in the process of filming field trips, and so we'll be offering both pre-recorded and live field trips by the first week of October. So there has been no grass growing. We've been quite busy trying to make sure that we're there for our audience, and we've had to reduce operations in certain areas and reduce staff in other areas. But we've allowed our mission statement to really guide where we're going with everything, and making sure that we're both open to the public and caring for our collections as best as we can and meet our mission. So I think it's gone as well as it possibly could in a year of craziness.
Yeah, and I love that sort of parting statement of just mission first, right? I think for so many of us, our real successes over the past 6 months have come from really focusing on our mission. I should have mentioned before I introduced Jim that, and you might be wondering why they were able to open so early, they were able to fall kind of under that outdoor recreation reopening, which happened earlier in the summer. And they have a lot of outdoor space, so camps were all outside. So yeah, yay, thank you, Jim. So Sadie Thayer comes to us from the Kittitas County Historical Museum, and they also were able to reopen earlier in the summer because their county moved into phase 3. I don't even know when. The last 6 months are a blur, but I'll let her share all of that. So there you go, Sadie.
All right, thank you, Allison. So over here in Ellensburg, we closed down to the public, similar to everyone else, just actually prior to the statewide mandate. We shut our doors March 16th. The mandate rolled out on the 17th, and we actually were very fortunate by having 2 staff in limited capacity that we maintained our staff. We let go our volunteers, just telling them to hold tight. We would see them once we knew what was going on and when we could bring them back. We actually were able to stay on site, socially distancing in over 9,000 square feet of display space, working on collection projects and what we needed to behind the scenes. And then on June 23rd, well, I should actually back up. In early June, we kept trying to get to phase 3, but unfortunately we had an outbreak happen in Kittitas County that delayed our reopening plans until June 23rd, which Kittitas County was granted the ability to go to phase 3. Our museum reopened its doors on June 24, going straight immediately into our regular operating hours of 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. We brought back on our volunteers, connecting with those immediately who wanted to come back. We did have 3 volunteers out of our core of about 15 who said, thanks, but no thanks. I don't want to get myself into a situation that I could be at risk. We understood because they were at the upper end of the high risk age group. Since then, we have lost additional volunteers that have been afraid of the virus. Not for the fact of what we've been doing here at the museum or anything. They've just looked at science and what's going on with the metrics and everything with a vaccine, and just chose that to put their health first. Attendance, we've seen about, similar to Jim, we've seen about a quarter of our normal attendance. When we reopened to the end of the month of June, we had 40 people come in 6 days of operation. That was great for those days, but through the month of July, a month that we normally get 800 to 900 people, we got 200. So, you know, rolling forward, we keep seeing each month grow bigger, but it's still a quarter of operations. However, fortunately, we're free admission, so we're not dependent on what comes in the door. As a county museum, our name is kind of a misnomer. We're not county funded. We're not city funded. We don't get any outside force or outside support except what very generous donations are. We're actually private nonprofit. We have income streams that are very lucrative investment properties. We own and operate 6 apartments. So as long as our tenants are very stable, we can earn that income. So we've been just worried in that regard because of residentials and the landlord or the tenancy clause of no eviction due to non-payment of rent. We also have 2 commercial properties that we receive commercial rents. So we're very fortunate in those regards that we've actually continued to operate and continue to see income without any fluctuation. Cash sales, we've been seeing our gift shop earn anywhere from $200 to $300 a week for the people who come in. Beyond that, folks who come through, we do maintain and clean after our guests. And the only thing we've had an issue with is a push-pull with our county health officer. Because of the recent outbreaks in Kittitas County, we've actually had where our county health officer is more cautious than what the state health guidelines are. So when it was initially passed about the 50% capacity for phase 3 counties, we were actually told we could only have 10 people in while our guidelines said we could have 45. So it's still a suggestion that you check with your local health officials to make sure you abide by whatever your county or city health official is, because they still have that local mandate and can rule above whatever is put out by the governor. Fortunately, he's seen how we've been doing and has relaxed his view. However, he still does want us to stay at lower numbers. So we can't still, even though we're in phase 3, we are cautioned against events, cautioned against major activities, rentals, anything until he's, looking at the earliest we can return to our lecture series is late spring 2021. So right now we're also looking at what'll happen coming forward as we are in the midst of planning our lodging tax application, and what that brings as a grant process, what other activities are on the docket, and everything. But beyond that, we've got enough supplies, we've got our staff trained, we've got our volunteers, and I'm just kind of happy to see the people who walk in the door, and they're happy we're here and we're open.
For sure. Thank you, Sadie. And thanks for making that really important point that in a lot of or in some cases, the county public health officials may say different than these statewide reopening guidelines. So that certainly happened here in Tacoma. Right as the governor approved our reopening plan for museums, we were experiencing a bit of a bump in cases. And so all of the museums in downtown Tacoma were told that they could not reopen. So we waited a few more weeks and cases look good, and the Pierce County Health Department has given us the thumbs up now to move forward. But definitely, you know, if you're deferring to anybody, it is those kind of more local public health officials. They're more tuned into what's happening on the ground in your community. Cool, thank you, Sadie. I'm actually, Joseph, gonna change my mind. I'm gonna go over to John first, because they've also been open for a little while out at the Polson Museum in Grays Harbor and Hoquiam, and then we'll come back to Joseph because they just reopened, and we'll kind of start our Q&A after Joseph shares a few thoughts. So John, take it away.
Take it away. So we've been open, yeah, as you know, since 1st of July is when we opened. We were allowed to be open in middle of June, but because of this massive painting project that we took advantage of during the closure, myself being 5 days and my collections manager 2 days a week, we needed to wrap that up. So since July 1st, I would echo what Jim said about, and Sadie as well, about reduced numbers that we've seen, what we'd normally see in the summer. We've seen, and I haven't done any statistical math on it, but I can just say from kind of a gut watching of what's been coming through the door, it's been a lot less than normal. And even so, the fact that we had a Smithsonian traveling exhibit that we really put a lot of effort into publicizing prior to reopening and letting people know all through the closure that we were going to be able to retain that, we still saw a lot fewer people than we normally would. So that was a bit of an unfortunate thing. But on the other hand, the issue of dealing with the total capacity of people who would be allowed in the building, we've never, even on our best day, run into an issue where we've had too many people waiting at the door to get in. So, and it's kind of typical. We're in a historic house museum. It's a 6,500 square foot mansion here in Hoquiam. And I should mention the Polson Museum, if you didn't already catch that name. We typically don't have large crowds all at once coming to us, and so it's really it's proven to be that case throughout the time that we've been reopened. So again, never had to worry about too many folks at any given time. The issue of one-way traffic, so forth, we took the stance that because of the configuration of our mansion, that we really couldn't create a one-way traffic flow. So we just again took the stance that adults are going to be adults and let them choose their path in a way that doesn't bump into other guests, and it's proven to work very well for us. We've never had an issue with anybody feeling you know, too close to their neighbor, so to speak. So all in all, the experience we've had has been really positive. It's been, other than lower numbers, but again, much like Sadie said, we're not relying entirely on admissions for our primary revenue. We have found certainly the biggest thing for us on the revenue side of things is that we had to cancel our most significant fundraiser of the year, which is what we call our red car raffle. We've all, for the last 15 years or so, given away a brand new automobile, and we rely on all the big events of the summer of car shows and the county fair and our Loggers Playday Parade as being the places where we sell those raffle tickets, and that entirely got canceled this year. So we've been well, scrounging to find funds in other ways. We, much like Sadie, own a apartment complex, and we have not had problem with tenant default on anything. Everybody's gainfully employed, so that's not been an issue. And I know that's kind of an odd revenue stream for museums, but for those of you out there in a position to acquire an apartment complex, do it. It's not so bad to being a landlord after all. But nonetheless, those issues of money are certainly something that we're keeping an eye on as we move towards the latter part of the year. But so far, so good. We've actually gotten some larger donations in that we might not have gotten just because of our call out for increased support. In fact, we got a donation of such significance, we're able to hire a third person to run a restoration project that we've had on the back burner for some time. So that's starting in October, that we'll be having our new employees start. But let's see what else to say. A couple of things that are related to events that we decided to make work for us. One was in regards to the Hometown Teams exhibit that we had through the Smithsonian, where we used the guidelines that were set forth by the state for drive-in movie theaters to do a tailgate party where we allowed folks to come onto our grounds with their automobiles, and then spacing those 10 feet apart, we held a tailgate party as part of this sports-themed exhibit that we had. And it actually was not nearly as successful as I would have hoped it would be in terms of getting more people here. Were it not for a local car club that decided to descend upon us with historic automobiles, it would have been a total bust. I think we had about 3 people that showed up otherwise. So again, I think the public is a little bit hesitant to really want to do any kind of big gathering things. That said, if you hold a rummage sale, it's going to be very successful. We found we wound up going forward with a very large rummage sale held in our big railroad camp shop, which is an open air shop, allowed for very good breezeway. Social distancing was not really an issue, and then having people wear masks was a requirement of entry, and that proved to be very successful for us. We'd done a lot of cleaning during the closure of back corners of our institution, and then we accepted donations of good rummage from our patrons as well, and it was just pretty wildly successful, actually. So that said, people are always out for a good bargain, and they'll show up to your facility if you're doing that kind of an event. But
And I always have to say this, you didn't sell anything from the collection, right?
no, well, we had a few deaccessioned items that that were part of that process of making go away the correct way, but no, we didn't sell our collection. No, not at all. But there were some dishware from way back when that was deaccessioned some time ago that we did run through that. But no, it was like, microwave ovens and crap like that people throw at you when you open your door. Lots of clothing. In fact, I've got our pickup is completely loaded to the gills to take the rest of the leftovers to Goodwill, and because of the smoke conditions here, they've not been open for accepting donations, so the truck is still full. But anyway, so those are I guess just kind of a few of our experiences. I don't know, it's been pretty tame. Our volunteers are all back in force. We have volunteers working in their own corners of this building, so it's worked out really well to have folks distanced from each other. People with their own offices or their own spaces, their own wood shop in the case of our carpenter, doing projects that have been ongoing all through the year, even before the closure and the whole coronavirus issue. So we're busy.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, John. I think for Sadie and John too, having been in phase 3 for quite a while now, there's a lot more kind of flexibility once you get to that sort of phase 3. And also the thing that we've been saying since the start of all of this is the ultimate win, if there's such a thing during all of this, is if you have a significant piece of real estate to work with, right? If you have some land, some outdoor space, both John and Jim have a lot of outdoor space that they can kind of play with, and that is such a lucky thing to have right now.
It is. We booked a wedding just today for October, and we did have to cancel on a wedding reception after we'd had one booked. The governor put those orders in. 2 days later, we would have had this reception. They decided they canceled. And so, there's been some ups and downs with regards to those events that would have otherwise taken place. But we did have one wedding go through at our facility, and we do have another one scheduled. But every other baby shower, bridal, all the things that we normally count on for revenue this time of year, everything's dried up. So as you'd expect.
And for those rentals, John, you're kind of, they have to meet those same guidelines, right?
They do. Yeah, you have the capacity and the overall number, and we have those numbers set so people know what to expect and what they're allowed to not to
very
do.
Small, intimate gatherings.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Joseph's down in Cowlitz County, and you guys just reopened maybe last week?
We opened on the 1st of September, and So we were kind of like everybody else, kind of shutting down around the same time. I kind of look at Friday the 13th in March as kind of the Black Friday the 13th. The clouds rolled in, the storm was coming, schools were shut down, and that's when the question came about, do I have the authority to close the museum, or is that further up the chain in the county, because we are a county building, and that was a county commissioner decision apparently. So I wrote a letter, so I had the documentation there that it was my intent that we close the museum the following week on Monday, because I didn't want swarms of kids coming into the museum with all these closed schools, because I figured that was the next step. It rains a lot around here during that time of the year. Well, anywhere on Western Washington, it's like that. So we're a county of 150,000 people, and sorry, 110,000 people. We're mostly rural. And so we were optimistic about getting to phase 3 in early July or thereabouts. And then everyone wanted to have parties on the 4th of July. So as we saw statewide, all the applications were put on freeze. And so during that time, we had been focusing on interior projects or painting or exhibits. We did some work on a historic car that we brought into our exhibit for our Mount St. Helens 40th anniversary, which was a shame because we had partnered with so many different organizations for the 40th anniversary of Mount St. Helens, and it all just unraveled. And that's too bad, but we've been talking about doing 40+1 for next year. So we're being optimistic about that. When the governor announced on Thursday the 20th that we could open museums in phase 2 counties, we were pretty much ready to go. We only needed maybe a matter of a day or so to get all the final touches ready, move all the boxes and that were on tables, because we're using all these spaces that would normally be either meeting room space or hallways or exhibits to do our organization projects that we had been doing during the closing, and just put everything back away. And we were open on the 1st of September. I wanted to make sure that we complied with the county's risk management and with the county Department of Health, and using the guidelines from the governor that the museum working group put together and that the governor then modified and approved. I implemented that into our opening plan. And the risk manager, when she walked through the museum, she said of all the 16 departments, we were the one that was the most dialed in as far as having all of our measures in place. We had all the proper signage, the one-way directional finding, hand sanitizer. I mean, everything was perfect. We even utilized exhibit cases, the acrylic exhibit cases, to put by the front desk in such a way that they created the sneeze guard. So we didn't have to spend any money on that. So that was kind of nice. So some other things, there's comments about capacity. While I walk around the building, I'm thinking, where's our maximum capacity signs in all the rooms? And that wasn't on our meeting room. It wasn't in any of the gallery space. So I found out that the city of Kelso, where our museum is located, actually determines that when they issue permits. And so we got our capacity at, it would be 60 people would be the 1/4 capacity amount, which I actually set the amount lower than that because we're kind of like John's museum, where we get usually a trickle or a few people come in at a time. And so there's enough space for people to spread out. And we haven't had an issue yet. And we've also noticed a decrease in attendance, probably around 1/4 of the people that normally come in. We do not charge admission, so that hasn't affected us. It's just the donation box has a lot less money in it because there's less people coming through. During the closure and getting close to opening, I stayed in contact with other museums that were similar size and in nearby counties. Lewis County, John over at the Polson Museum, Liz over at the Renton History Museum, and Brad over at the Clark County Museum. I would just check in with them periodically, see where they were at, how they were doing, and compare notes. We also have a Heritage Association of the Lower Columbia that's mostly Cowlitz County focused. And most of the museums around here are small mom and pop operations that are historic houses. They're operated by volunteers. And in my conversations with them have found out that most of them are not opening because the demographic of their volunteers are people more susceptible to have complications with COVID. So more than half of those small mom and pop museums are closed. And so that I thought was an interesting thing to note with the little museums, or we're little museums, or these are the very little museums. Trying to think, we've, in the control of access into the building, we used to let people just kind of breeze into our office. And so we would have what I would call museum groupies that would come in and they'd hang out and they'd like to, shoot the breeze with the staff and whatnot. Well, we're not having that anymore. We're keeping the doors shut. We want people to have appointments with staff if they're going to see us. So the very open door atmosphere that we had, unfortunately, has gone away, although it does allow staff to really focus more in the back office on their work instead of having people constantly drift in and have these 15-minute conversations with you and whatnot. But we do miss them because they're members of the museum, they're friends, they're board members, they're people in our community. And so that was another thing we noticed. I'm trying to think what else we had. Our first actual live event was a couple days before the governor announced the opening, which was on August 18th, was the centennial for the ratification of the 19th Amendment for universal suffrage. And we participated in an outdoor parade, a static parade where the cars drive by, and we had a booth. And it was, I'm sure many of you probably felt this too, on the first day when you had to have an physical interface with the public. It's the first time I wore a pair of khakis in about 5 months. I've been wearing shorts and sandals and stuff to work because I'm just in this isolated environment. We haven't had any problems with the mask requirement or the public coming in and wearing masks. We do have masks that we will provide for free if somebody does not have a mask. And we do post the governor's order and also our county's orders on the front doors as reference. If anybody has any questions, we are not the enforcers of the policies, but we do point out that this is the policy. And that was always a question that I had with the county was, can we, if we're going to ask people to do it or require it, how do we enforce it? I'm trying to think. I got notes all over the place here. We've got, we've gone through our attic too, just like everyone at their homes have gone through their attic and have brought everything to Goodwill. We've been very busy during the closure with an increase of phone calls with inquiries about items that people have found, and either they want to know information about it or they want to bring it by and donate it to the museum. So we've been, in the last, 2.5 weeks, very smooth transition to reopening. We're really happy to see people coming into our doors. It's really kind of brightened up everybody's mood, I think, to be able to have a face-to-face public interaction. We have also, of course, adapted our programming to online format. Our educator was probably the most impacted because she does our programs and education and outreach into the schools. And so although she had the content for the program, she did have to modify things, of course, like we all have for distance connections.
Hey, Joseph, can I jump in? Because that is a question that's in the chat here. So how is your education person and your staff going to approach requests for field trips and kind of school programming this fall?
So what we've done, we actually have a homeschool group that is going to come in. They're scheduled to come in later this month. And what we will do is, as long as they're within the capacity of the museum, we will have the school group come in. But if somebody comes to the museum that's not part of that group, we're going to let them know that there's an education program going on and recommend that they, keep a distance as that education program's migrating through the museum. We are actually recommending, ideally, if these groups could come in on Saturdays. We are open our normal hours from 10 o'clock to 4 o'clock Tuesday through Saturday. However, Saturdays are by appointment only. And so we could just make an appointment for that homeschool group or another school group, or maybe we put them into the front end or the back end of the day if it's during the weekdays. But we haven't had a problem yet. But I think that if we just alert any people that are coming into the museum of an upcoming group scheduled to come soon, or a group that's already in motion, that's what we would do, and let them make their choice if they want to wait or come back.
Yeah, great. Jim also just dropped a thought on education programs in the chat. Jim, do you want to kind of follow up on what you posted?
Yeah, so we had initially planned to offer small group tours as well as after school program. And, you know, as we're doing the numbers, we just did not have staff capacity to do that. And so what we've decided to do instead was offer both live and recorded field trips. The live field trips will be great because our educator will be able to take questions from the classes as she moves around the museum and presents the same material that they would be getting if they were coming in person. And they'll be able to ask the same questions that they do. So we're really excited to be able to offer the live field trip options. And fortunately, we're supported by the Fort Nisqually Foundation. They received a very generous donation that enabled us to be able to purchase the equipment necessary to purchase or to be able to do the live program. So we're quite fortunate in that regard.
Cool. John and Sadie, do you guys have plans for schools this fall?
I can say that we do not. We typically get those school field trips in the spring when the kids are all antsy to get out of class and, you know, the usual timing of things, but we've made no attempt to advertise or solicit, you know, getting school groups at this time. It just didn't seem like the right thing to do. I would like to share with folks, though, one thing we did do, which this last Saturday would have been Hoquiam's annual Loggers Playday Festival, which is the biggest event in the year for our town, certainly. And there's typically a very large parade associated with that, and then an evening show that we would participate in with bringing vintage power saws and drag saws and so forth. And we always bring our equipment to the parade that's vintage machinery. So this year, I don't know if you can kind of make this work in the, this was our parade entry. But we took the parade to the people this year. We just put it on Facebook that, hey, we're going to be in your neighborhood with our 1948 Heister lumber carrier and our 1949 Chevy flatbed. And so we just drove 2 hours driving through all the residential streets in town and ringing our streetcar bell, and you know, just kind of made a ruckus out of the deal. It was kind of fun. We didn't see a lot of people out because the smoke was so bad that day, but nevertheless, if you want to stage your own personal parade and just take it around, it did work. It was kind of fun. So
I love that. You guys are so creative there at the Polson Museum. Harriet from Quincy Valley mentioned in the chat that they're going to hold off, and sort of they have been in communication with the school district. They normally see all the third graders, and they're going to hold off till the spring because, like all of our school programs, really at the heart, their value is in the kind of hands-on experience, and we know how much of that is lost in this kind of digital offering. So yeah, holding off to spring, which is a busy school season time anyway. Yeah, Sadie.
Oh, I was going to say at our museum, so we're working with the local school district. So if school kids want to come in on an appointment basis for a specialty program, they can. They have to coordinate in advance. And since they're all doing a hybrid school or hybrid classes, you know, we'll work with them and their teachers to make sure we're hitting the right curriculum and the right history components. Normally we get second graders, third graders, and eighth graders coming through. But our biggest thing is also we would get our university students coming in for college classes, especially museum studies. So we're actually going to have the professor of the Introduction to Museum Studies come through on the last day of the month, and she's going to do a Zoom tour through, and where all her students are going to be on Zoom. She's going to be here in person and tour through, so her and I can engage, and then her students can have the experience as they normally would. But on a side note, we're also doing virtual internships because that's a normal component of what we do here. We are very active with the Central Washington University campus, providing opportunities for students in the history department and anthropology, museum studies. So it's a different aspect for us, and for the virtual internships, and we're anxious to get back to the hands-on, considering while we have 9,000 square feet of display space, we have an additional about 4,000 square feet of staff only behind the scenes space. That when you only have 2 staff, there's a lot of ways to socially distance.
Yeah. Yes. Again, if you're blessed with square footage, you're sitting
Indeed.
pretty.
Indeed.
I'm going to ask John from the Spark Museum to unmute. He has something he wanted to share about sort of interactive exhibits and maybe a trick they've learned.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to pass this on. One of the things that surprised us in the final guideline when it came out was that they changed the requirement for interactive exhibits, and some of you may have noticed that also. The previous guideline didn't require a remote, a touchless pushing device, and the final guideline did. So it kind of caught us off guard a little bit because we have a number of interactive exhibits in the museum that involve pushing a button which starts up an old dynamo or whatever. And we came up with the great idea that we call these pencil pushers. It's just a pusher, a button, a pencil, but it works great for pushing buttons. It's got a rubber tip. And we personalize them with the name and location of the museum on our website. And we just give them out when people come in the museum. So they take them home so we don't have to sanitize them. And it worked great to solve that problem for us.
I love that. Cost effective. It's a little souvenir. They'll remember you when they get home. Great job. We have just a few more minutes. I just wanted to note that folks have sort of shared some information in the chat. So if you haven't sort of given that a peruse, definitely do that. Ashley shared an idea for setting up a text to donate link. I do want to kind of echo what Jim mentioned, that they've gotten a really good response from their kind of tiered payment scheme for some of their online programs. And I do know a lot of museums are doing digital programs that are suggested donations, and have had a really positive response. So I know that there's this sense, and I think John mentioned it too, there's this sense that if people are looking to donate money, they're donating it to emergency services, and but museums are having quite a bit of success in kind of their philanthropic asks right now. So don't be scared to ask. Mostly they want to know how you're doing. Your communities want to know how you guys are holding up. So, kind of like check-in, touching base. Here's what we're working on. Here's how we spent that time during the closure. We painted every wall, or we did all of this. People really want to kind of feel that connection. So let me okay, great. Let me scooch down. Oh, you guys are answering each other's questions, and this is where I'm missing my counterpart. So Ashley says that they're offering 4 to 8 minute lessons to go along with sort of more traditional worksheet type things for the Mary Olson Farm. I think that's a great idea. I've heard that from teachers too, that they're not necessarily looking for like a 45-minute video or a virtual tour, but kind of small segments that they can more easily fit into their online time with students. I know for all the parents out there, I think teachers learned a little bit from the spring, and they're trying to give brain breaks and split up the day so the kids aren't kind of online for that full time. But then that means they have to cram quite a lot in those times that they are all together. So that's a great idea. And thank you, Ashley, for sharing all of that. anything else that I'm missing? I did want to, oh yeah, yay to Nancy and folks at Aberdeen for their first YouTube video. Love it. I just appreciate so much how brave everybody is. It's really fantastic. Yeah, so Christopher, you were asking about kind of the attendance reduction. It sounds to me, and I would love to sort of do some official data collection on this, but it sounds to me most folks that have reopened are seeing about 25% of their typical capacity for this time of year. Does that sound about right? Maybe give a thumbs up if that's in the ballpark of what you kind of, yeah, you too, Harriet, okay. That sounds to me like that's what most people are kind of experiencing, and it's hard to say as we move out of the summer and into the fall what any of that's gonna kind of mean. The one thing I wanted to ask, and and maybe we'll finish here. Oh, there's more questions. I am curious about, and the donuts from McCleary, if you're following the donuts in McCleary, yay. Because I'm familiar with the volunteer program at Fort Nisqually, I'd like to ask Jim to just speak a little bit about how volunteer management has changed for them up there, because I know that kind of volunteers are front of mind for a lot of you, and I know a lot of you are from volunteer-run museums. All you have is volunteers. And as Sadie mentioned, people have, our volunteers have different levels of comfortability. So Jim, if you could just kind of describe what you guys are doing in that area.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a pretty active volunteer corps here at Fort Nisqually. We have about 200 active volunteers. However, approximately 80% of those are in the high-risk category. They're either 65 and older, or they have a health condition, something along those lines. So, what is normally a really robust volunteer corps all of a sudden was shrunk down to, just a few people. And so we've had to limit the capacity in the building that they usually use as their volunteer headquarters, if you will, where they, rendezvous to change into period clothing or eat their lunch during the day or whatever. So we've had to limit that area. We also have not been allowing access to any of our buildings other than to look in through the front door. All of our volunteers are interpreting outside, whether they're on the porch of the factor's house or by the woodshed, or we have allowed some interpretation to occur in our period kitchen and our blacksmith forge, because those are obviously things where you need to use, the forge or the wood burning stove. And so for the most part, everyone has operated as well as they could. We did have to change some of our staffing around. We had a volunteer coordinator who was needed to focus on virtual programming. And so we actually reached out to one of our longtime volunteers who was very capable of assisting with our volunteer management. And so I'm pretty sure she's in the running for Volunteer of the Year for this year, because her communication has been so excellent. But being a volunteer, she knows she can sort of anticipate the types of questions that a lot of our volunteers are going to ask. And so she's communicated really well with them. But we're using Better Impact as our volunteer management software. And so all of our volunteers are able to sign up for shifts on Better Impact, and that's helping us do a couple of things. It tracks the volunteer hours, and it also acts as contact tracing for our volunteers without them having to sign in on a sheet of paper and touch a pen that 100 other people have touched. So that's worked out pretty well for us. And then as far as staff are concerned, we developed a QR code that staff can scan for contact tracing. So we've had to keep up with all that, which has been another area that I didn't think to mention before, but it's worked out pretty well.
Yeah, great. And Harriet was asking about those kind of volunteer management programs, via logistics, Track It Forward, and Better Impact is a very robust system. It can do a lot of things, but there are a lot of much more accessible programs. So I know at Fort Nisqually pre-COVID, it was sort of this kind of wonderful free-for-all where volunteers would kind of come if they woke up that morning and felt like coming to the fort that day, and hopefully they'd give us a call and let us know they were coming, but they might not, and it was okay. We had plenty of room and whatever, and they've just done a great job. So it was a real culture shift to have to get the volunteers to start. I'm imagining to start like signing
yeah,
up.
no, it was a culture shift because they were not accustomed to having to sign up for shifts, and we've required that. And so, you know, I think it probably put some people off, but those people were already in the high risk category and they weren't going to come anyway. So that was okay.
And
you know,
Jim, have you been taking temperatures of volunteers? Do you guys do a health check form or?
no. So that's part of the contact tracing. The questions that are asked in, so like I mentioned, the QR code for staff, there is a questionnaire. And so you kind of read over the questionnaire and you either mark yes or no, you had COVID symptoms. And if it's no, then fine, you can work. And if it's yes, then obviously you shouldn't be there in the first place. But no, we've only taken temperatures of the campers when we were doing the day camps. Every child would have their temperature checked when they came in each day. Of course, everybody's wearing masks, washing hands, sanitizing, yada yada yada, all the things, as well as social distancing. And so, you know, we've been fortunate. We haven't, you know, knock on wood, had any issues yet.
Yeah, absolutely. And Harriet's saying that they do have a login and temp for paid or contracted staff only, but not volunteers. So that's pretty consistent. We're just going to kind of wrap up. And I hope that you all know that if we hang up here and in 10 minutes you think of a question or an idea that you want to share, please just shoot me an email, allison.campbell@wshs.wa.gov. Most of you know where to find me. I will send up a follow-up email probably later today or tomorrow with the recording of this in case you want to share that with anybody. But I do just kind of want to finally end with, I was looking at Linda's comment up in the Forks Timber Museum. I know that there are a significant number of museums in our state who are opting not to reopen, even though they've been given the blessing. And this is because they're in a historic house museum that just can't accommodate some of the changes that would have to be made, or because they're all volunteer run and finding volunteers that are comfortable coming back into the space is difficult. There's so many reasons. And I think that you all know your communities, you know your volunteers and your staff, you know your sites and your spaces better than anyone. And so we hope that you feel empowered to make those decisions. But if there's anything that I can do to help or any answers I can try and find for you, please don't hesitate to touch base. It's been wonderful to see you. If I don't see you before, look out for October 6th for a conversation about earthquake preparedness. One more thing to worry about in the midst of everything. I hope that the air around you all clears up in the next day or two. It's supposed to out here on the Puget Sound. And thank you so much for being here. It's always lovely to see your faces. And thanks to Jim and John and Joseph and Sadie for sharing your kind of thoughts and experiences so far. So we'll see y'all soon.